Sorry, my phone died. It's nothing. I'm fine. These allegations are completely unfounded. The company was not aware of any wrongdoing. I love you. We hear anywhere from 10 to 200 lies a day, and we spent much of our history coming up with ways to detect them. From medieval torture devices to polygraphs, blood pressure and breathing monitors, voice stress analyzers, eye trackers, infrared brain scanners, and even the 400-pound electroencephalogram. But although such tools have worked under certain circumstances, most can be fooled with enough preparation, and none are considered reliable enough to even be admissible in court. But what if the problem is not with the techniques, but the underlying assumption that lying spurs physiological changes? What if we took a more direct approach, using communication science to analyze the lies themselves? On a psychological level, we lie partly to paint a better picture of ourselves, connecting our fantasies to the person we wish we were rather than the person we are. But while our brain is busy dreaming, it's letting plenty of signals slip by. Our conscious mind only controls about 5% of our cognitive function, including communication, while the other 95% occurs beyond our awareness. And according to the literature on reality monitoring, stories based on imagined experiences are qualitatively different from those based on real experiences. This suggests that creating a false story about a personal topic takes work and results in a different pattern of language use. A technology known as linguistic text analysis has helped to identify 4 such common patterns in the subconscious language of deception. First, liars reference themselves less when making deceptive statements. They write or talk more about others, often using the third person to distance and disassociate themselves from their lie. Which sounds more false? Absolutely no party took place at this house, or I didn't host a party here. Second, liars tend to be more negative, because on a subconscious level, they feel guilty about lying. For example, a liar might say something like, "Sorry, my stupid phone battery died. I hate that thing." Third, liars typically explain events in simple terms, since our brains struggle to build a complex lie. Judgment and evaluation are complex things for our brains to compute. As a U.S. president once famously insisted, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." And finally, even though liars keep descriptions simple, they tend to use longer and more convoluted sentence structure, inserting unnecessary words and irrelevant but factual-sounding details in order to pad the lie. Another president confronted with a scandal proclaimed, "I can say categorically that this investigation indicates that no one on the White House staff, no one in this administration presently employed was involved in this very bizarre incident." Let's apply linguistic analysis to some famous examples. Take 7-time Tour de France winner Lance Armstrong. When comparing a 2005 interview in which he had denied taking performance-enhancing drugs to a 2013 interview in which he admitted it, his use of personal pronouns increased by nearly 3/4. Note the contrast between the following 2 quotes. First, "Okay, a guy in a Parisian laboratory opens up your sample, Jean-Francis so-and-so, and he tests it. And then you get a phone call from a newspaper that says, 'We found you to be positive 6 times for EPO.' Second, I lost myself in all of that. I'm sure there would be other people that couldn't handle it, but I certainly couldn't handle it, and I was used to controlling everything in my life. I controlled every outcome in my life." In his denial, Armstrong described a hypothetical situation focused on someone else, removing himself from the situation entirely. In his admission, he owns his statements, delving into his personal emotions and motivations. But the use of personal pronouns is just one indicator of deception. Let's look at another example from former Senator and U.S. presidential candidate John Edwards. "I only know that the apparent father has said publicly that he is the father of the baby. I also have not been engaged in any activity of any description that requested, agreed to, or supported payments of any kind to the woman or to the apparent father of the baby." Not only is that a pretty long-winded way to say, "the baby isn't mine," but Edwards never calls the other parties by name, instead saying, "that baby, the woman, and the apparent father." Now let's see what he had to say when later admitting paternity. "I am Quinn's father. I will do everything in my power to provide her with the love and support she deserves." The statement is short and direct, calling the child by name and addressing his role in her life. So how can you apply these lie-spotting techniques to your life? First, remember that many of the lies we encounter on a daily basis are far less serious than these examples, It may even be harmless. But it's still worthwhile to be aware of telltale clues like minimal self-references, negative language, simple explanations, and convoluted phrasing. It just might help you avoid an overvalued stock, an ineffective product, or even a terrible relationship.
In 1995, the British Medical Journal published an astonishing report about a 29-year-old builder. He accidentally jumped onto a 15-centimeter nail, which pierced straight through his steel-toed boot. He was in such agonizing pain that even the smallest movement was unbearable. But when the doctors took off his boot, they faced a surprising sight. The nail had never touched his foot at all. For hundreds of years, scientists thought that pain was a direct response to damage. By that logic, the more severe an injury is, the more pain it should cause. But as we've learned more about the science of pain, we've discovered that pain and tissue damage don't always go hand in hand, even when the body's threat signaling mechanisms are fully functioning. We're capable of experiencing severe pain out of proportion to an actual injury, and even pain without any injury, like the builder, or the well-documented cases of male partners of pregnant women experiencing pain during the pregnancy or labor. What's going on here? There are actually two phenomena at play: the experience of pain and a biological process called nociception. Nociception is part of the nervous system's protective response to harmful or potentially harmful stimuli. Sensors in specialized nerve endings detect mechanical, thermal, and chemical threats. If enough sensors are activated, electrical signals shoot up the nerve to the spine and onto the brain. The brain weighs the importance of these signals and produces pain if it decides the body needs protection. Typically, pain helps the body avoid further injury or damage. But there are a whole set of factors besides nociception that can influence the experience of pain and make pain less useful. First, there are biological factors that amplify nociceptive signals to the brain. If nerve fibers are activated repeatedly, the brain may decide they need to be more sensitive to adequately protect the body from threats. More stress sensors can be added to nerve fibers until they become so sensitive that even light touches to the skin spark intense electrical signals. In other cases, nerves adapt to send signals more efficiently, amplifying the message. These forms of amplification are most common in people experiencing chronic pain, which is defined as pain lasting more than 3 months. When the nervous system is nudged into an ongoing state of high alert, pain can outlast physical injury. This creates a vicious cycle in which the longer pain persists, the more difficult it becomes to reverse. Psychological factors clearly play a role in pain too, potentially by influencing nociception and by influencing the brain directly. A person's emotional state, memories, beliefs about pain, and expectations about treatment can all influence how much pain they experience. In one study, children who reported believing that they had no control over pain actually experienced more intense pain than those who believed they had some control. Features of the environment matter too. In one experiment, volunteers with a cold rod placed on the back of their hand reported feeling more pain when they were shown a red light than a blue one, even though the rod was the same temperature each time. Finally, social factors like the availability of family support can affect perception of pain. All of this means that a multi-pronged approach to pain treatment that includes pain specialists, physical therapists, clinical psychologists, nurses, and other healthcare professionals is often most effective. We're only beginning to uncover the mechanisms behind the experience of pain, but there are some promising areas of research. Until recently, we thought the glial cells surrounding neurons were just support structures, but now we know they have a huge role in influencing nociception. Studies have shown that disabling certain brain circuits in the amygdala can eliminate pain in rats, and genetic testing in people with rare disorders that prevent them from feeling pain have pinpointed several other possible targets for drugs and perhaps eventually gene therapy. Ever wonder how pain relievers work or how other animals experience pain? Check out these lessons to learn more.
When faced with a big challenge where potential failure seems to lurk at every corner, maybe you've heard this advice before. Be more confident. And most likely, this is what you think when you hear it. If only it were that simple. But what is confidence? Take the belief that you are valuable, worthwhile, and capable, also known as self-esteem. Add in the optimism that comes when you are certain of your abilities, and then empowered by these, act courageously to face a challenge head-on. This is confidence. It turns thoughts into action. So where does confidence even come from? There are several factors that impact confidence. 1. What you're born with, such as your genes, which will impact things like the balance of neurochemicals in your brain. 2. How you're treated. This includes the social pressures of your environment. And 3. The part you have control over, the choices you make, the risks you take, and how you think about and respond to challenges and setbacks. It isn't possible to completely untangle these 3 factors, but the personal choices we make certainly play a major role in confidence development. So, by keeping in mind a few practical tips, we do actually have the power to cultivate our own confidence. Tip 1. A quick fix. There are a few tricks that can give you an immediate confidence boost in the short term. Picture your success when you're beginning a difficult task. Something as simple as listening to music with deep bass. It can promote feelings of power. You can even strike a powerful pose or give yourself a pep talk. Tip 2. Believe in your ability to improve. If you're looking for a long-term change, consider the way you think about your abilities and talents. Do you think they are fixed at birth, or that they can be developed, like a muscle? These beliefs matter because they can influence how you act when you're faced with setbacks. If you have a fixed mindset, meaning that you think your talents are locked in place, you might give up, assuming you've discovered something you're not very good at. But if you have a growth mindset and think your abilities can improve, a challenge is an opportunity to learn and grow. Neuroscience supports the growth mindset. The connections in your brain do get stronger and grow with study and practice. It also turns out, on average, people who have a growth mindset are more successful, getting better grades, and doing better in the face of challenges. Tip 3. Practice failure. Face it, you're going to fail sometimes. Everyone does. J.K. Rowling was rejected by 12 different publishers before one picked up Harry Potter. The Wright brothers built on history's failed attempts at flight, including some of their own, before designing a successful airplane. Studies show that those who fail regularly and keep trying anyway are better equipped to respond to challenges and setbacks in a constructive way. They learn how to try different strategies, ask others for advice, and persevere. So, think of a challenge you want to take on. Realize it's not going to be easy. Accept that you'll make mistakes, and be kind to yourself when you do. Give yourself a pep talk, stand up, and go for it. The excitement you'll feel knowing that whatever the result, you'll have gained greater knowledge and understanding. This is confidence.
Every day, a sea of decisions stretches before us. Some are small and unimportant, but others have a larger impact on our lives. For example, which politician should I vote for? Should I try the latest diet craze? Or will email make me a millionaire? We're bombarded with so many decisions that it's impossible to make a perfect choice every time. But there are many ways to improve our chances, and one particularly effective technique is critical thinking. This is a way of approaching a question that allows us to carefully deconstruct a situation, reveal its hidden issues, such as bias and manipulation, and make the best decision. If the critical part sounds negative, that's because, in a way, it is. Rather than choosing an answer because it feels right, a person who uses critical thinking subjects all available options to scrutiny and skepticism. Using the tools at their disposal, they'll eliminate everything but the most useful and reliable information. There are many different ways of approaching critical thinking, but here's one 5-step process that may help you solve any number of problems. 1. Formulate your question. In other words, know what you're looking for. This isn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, if you're deciding whether to try out the newest diet craze, your reasons for doing so may be obscured by other factors, like claims that you'll see results in just 2 weeks. But if you approach the situation with a clear view of what you're actually trying to accomplish by dieting, whether that's weight loss, better nutrition, or having more energy, that'll equip you to sift through this information critically, find what you're looking for, and decide whether the new fad really suits your needs. 2. Gather your information. There's lots of it out there, so having a clear idea of your question will help you determine what's relevant. If you're trying to decide on a diet to improve your nutrition, you may ask an expert for their advice or seek other people's testimonies. Information gathering helps you weigh different options, moving you closer to a decision that meets your goal. 3. Apply the information, something you do by asking critical questions. Facing a decision, ask yourself, what concepts are at work? What assumptions exist? Is my interpretation of the information logically sound? For example, in an email that promises you millions, you should consider, what is shaping my approach to this situation? Do I assume the sender is telling the truth? Based on the evidence, is it logical to assume I'll win any money? 4. Consider the implications. Imagine it's election time, and you've selected a political candidate based on their promise to make it cheaper for drivers to fill up on gas. At first glance, that seems great. But what about the long-term environmental effects? If gasoline use is less restricted by cost, this could also cause a huge surge in air pollution, an unintended consequence that's important to think about. 5. Explore other points of view. Ask yourself why so many people are drawn to the policies of the opposing political candidate. Even if you disagree with everything that candidate says, exploring the full spectrum of viewpoints might explain why some policies that don't seem valid to you appeal to others. This will allow you to explore alternatives, evaluate your own choices, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions. This 5-step process is just one tool, and it certainly won't eradicate difficult decisions from our lives, but it can help us increase the number of positive choices we make. Critical thinking can give us the tools to sift through a sea of information and find what we're looking for. And if enough of us use it, it has the power to make the world a more reasonable place.
Now, my subject is success, so people sometimes call me a motivational speaker. But I want you to know right up front, I'm not a motivational speaker. I couldn't pass the height requirement. And I couldn't motivate anybody. My employees actually call me a demotivational speaker. What I try to be is an informational speaker. I went out and found out some information about success, and I'm just here to pass it on. And my story started over 10 years ago on a plane. I was on my way to the TED conference in California, and in the seat next to me was a teenage girl, and she came from a really poor family, but she wanted to get somewhere in life. And as I tapped away on my computer, she kept asking me questions. Then out of the blue, she asked, "Are you successful?" I said, "No, I'm not successful. Terry Fox, my hero. Now there's a big success. He lost a leg to cancer, then ran thousands of miles and raised millions for cancer research." Or Bill Gates. Guy who owns his own plane doesn't have to sit next to some kid asking him questions. But then I told her about some of the stuff I'd done. I love communications, and I've won lots of awards in marketing. I love running, and I still sometimes win my age group, old farts over 60. My fastest marathon is 2 hours and 43 minutes to run the 26 miles or 42 kilometers. I've run over 50 marathons on all 7 continents. This was a run my wife and I did up the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu in Peru. And to qualify for the 7 continents, we had to run a marathon in Antarctica. But when we got there, it didn't look nice and calm like this. It looked like this. The waves were so high we couldn't get to shore. So we sailed 200 miles further south to where the seas were calm and ran the entire 26-mile marathon on the boat. 422 laps around the deck of that little boat. My wife and I have also climbed 2 of the world's 7 summits, the highest mountains on each continent. We climbed Aconcagua, the highest mountain on the American continent, and Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. Well, to be honest, I puked my way to the top of Kilimanjaro. I got altitude sickness. I got no sympathy from my wife. She passed me and did a lap around the top while I was still struggling up there. In spite of that, we're still together and have been for over 35 years. I'd say that's a success these days. So I said to the girl, "Well, I guess I have had some success." And then she said, "Okay, so are you a millionaire?" Now, I didn't know what to say, because when I grew up, it was bad manners to talk about money. But I figured I'd better be honest, and I said, "Yeah, I'm a millionaire, but I don't know how it happened. I never went after the money, and it's not that important to me." She said, "Maybe not to you, but it is to me. I don't want to be poor all my life. I want to get somewhere, but it's never going to happen." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Well, I'm not very smart. I'm not doing great in school." I said, "So what? I'm not smart. I barely passed high school. I had absolutely nothing going for me. I was never voted most popular or most likely to succeed. I started a whole new category, most likely to fail. But in the end, I did okay. So if I can do it, you can do it." And then she asked me the big question. "Okay, so what really leads to success?" I said, "Geez, sorry, I don't know. I guess somehow I did it. I don't know how I did it." So I get off the plane and go to the TED conference, and I'm standing in a room full of extraordinarily successful people in many fields: business, science, arts, health, technology, the environment. When it hit me, why don't I ask them what helped them succeed and find out what really leads to success for everyone? So I was all excited to get out there and start talking to these great people when the self-doubt set in. I mean, why would people want to talk to me? I'm not a famous journalist. I'm not even a journalist. So I was ready to stop the project before it even began. When who comes walking towards me but Ben Cohen, famous co-founder of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. I figured it was now or never. I pushed through the self-doubt, jumped out in front of him and said, "Ben, I'm working on this project. I don't even know what to ask you, but can you tell me what helped you succeed?" He said, "Yeah, sure, come on, let's go for a coffee." And over coffee and ice cream, Ben told me his story. Now here we are over 10 years later, and I've interviewed over 500 successful people face-to-face and collected thousands of other success stories. I wanted to find the common factors for success in all fields, so I had to interview people in careers ranging from A to Z. These are just the careers I interviewed beginning with the letter A, and in most cases more than one person. I interviewed 6 successful accountants, 5 corporate auditors, 5 astronauts who had been into space, 4 actors who had won the Academy Award for Best Actor, 3 of the world's top astrophysicists, 6 of the world's leading architects, and, oh yeah, 4 Nobel Prize winners. Yeah, I know, it doesn't start with A, but it's kind of cool. And I want to say a sincere thanks to all the great people that I've interviewed over the years. This really is their story. I'm just the messenger. The really big job was taking all the interviews and analyzing them word by word, line by line, and sorting them into all the factors that people said helped them succeed. And then you start to see the big factors that are common to most people's success. Altogether, I analyzed and sorted millions of words. Do you know how much work that is? That's all I do, day and night, sort and analyze. I'll tell you, if I ever get my hands on that kid on the plane, actually, if I do, I'll thank her, because I've never had so much fun and met so many interesting people. And now I can answer her question. I discovered the 8 traits successful people have in common, or the 8 to be great. Love what you do. Work really hard. Focus on one thing, not everything. Keep pushing yourself. Come up with good ideas. Keep improving yourself in what you do. Serve others something of value, because success isn't just about me, me, me. And persist, because there's no overnight success. Why did I pick these? Because when I added up all the comments in my interviews, more people said those 8 things helped them than anything else. The 8 traits are really the heart of success, the foundation. And then on top, we build the specific skills that we need for our particular field or career. Technical skills, analytical skills, people skills, creative skills, lots of other skills we can add on top depending on our field. But no matter what field we're in, these 8 traits will be at the heart of our success.
So you're stranded in a huge rainforest, and you've eaten a poisonous mushroom. To save your life, you need the antidote excreted by a certain species of frog. Unfortunately, only the female of the species produces the antidote. And to make matters worse, the male and female occur in equal numbers and look identical, with no way for you to tell them apart, except that the male has a distinctive croak. And it may just be your lucky day. To your left, you've spotted a frog on a tree stump. But before you start running to it, you're startled by the croak of a male frog coming from a clearing in the opposite direction. There you see 2 frogs, but you can't tell which one made the sound. You feel yourself starting to lose consciousness and realize you only have time to go in one direction before you collapse. What are your chances of survival if you head for the clearing and lick both of the frogs there? What about if you go to the tree stump? Which way should you go? If you chose to go to the clearing, you're right. But the hard part is correctly calculating your odds. There are 2 common incorrect ways of solving this problem. Wrong answer number 1. Assuming there's a roughly equal number of males and females, the probability of any one frog being either sex is 1 in 2, which is 0.5 or 50%. And since all frogs are independent of each other, the chance of any one of them being female should still be 50% each time you choose. This logic actually is correct for the tree stump, but not for the clearing. Wrong answer 2. First, you saw 2 frogs in the clearing. Now you've learned that at least one of them is male. But what are the chances that both are? If the probability of each individual frog being male is 0.5, then multiplying the 2 together will give you 0.25, which is 1 in 4, or 25%. So you have a 75% chance of getting at least one female and receiving the antidote. So here's the right answer. Going for the clearing gives you a 2 in 3 chance of survival, or about 67%. If you're wondering how this could possibly be right, it's because of something called conditional probability. Let's see how it unfolds. When we first see the 2 frogs, there are several possible combinations of male and female. If we write out the full list, we have what mathematicians call the sample space. And as we can see, out of the 4 possible combinations, only 1 has 2 males. So why was the answer of 75% wrong? Because the croak gives us additional information. As soon as we know that one of the frogs is male, that tells us there can't be a pair of females, which means we can eliminate that possibility from the sample space, leaving us with 3 possible combinations. Of them, 1 still has 2 males, giving us our 2 in 3 or 67% chance of getting a female. This is how conditional probability works. You start off with a large sample space that includes every possibility, but every additional piece of information allows you to eliminate possibilities, shrinking the sample space and increasing the probability of getting a particular combination. The point is that information affects probability. And conditional probability isn't just the stuff of abstract mathematical games. It pops up in the real world as well. Computers and other devices use conditional probability to detect likely errors in the strings of ones and zeros that all our data consists of. And in many of our own life decisions, we use information gained from past experience and our surroundings to narrow down our choices to the best options, so that maybe next time we can avoid eating that poisonous mushroom in the first place. You've been chosen as a champion to represent your wizarding house in a deadly duel against 2 rival magic schools. Your opponents are fearsome. From the Newtonitz school, a powerful sorcerer wields a wand that can turn people into fish, but his spell only works 70% of the time. And from the Leibniz school, an even more powerful enchantress wields a wand that turns people to statues, and it works 90% of the time. Lots are drawn, and you're chosen to cast the first spell in the duel. The Newtonitz magician will go second, and the Leibniz enchantress third, after which you'll repeat casting in that order until only one of you is left. The rules of magic duels are strict, and anyone who casts out of order immediately forfeits the duel. Also, to prevent draws, the rules stipulate that if everyone's still standing at the end of the first round, you'll all be turned into cats. Now you must choose a wand. Your wizarding house presents you with 3 options: the Banneker, which binds one target with vines and casts effectively 60% of the time; the Gaussian, which turns one target into a tree and works 80% of the time; and the incredibly rare Nerta 9000, which banishes one target to a distant mountaintop and casts perfectly 100% of the time. Your opponents are masters of strategy as well as sorcery, and you know they'll make the choices that maximize their own chances of success. Which wand should you choose, and what strategy should you employ to have the greatest chance of winning the duel? You reach for the Nerta 9000 first. After all, it makes sense to enter the duel with the most powerful wand. But before you pick it up, you consider what would happen. As the most dangerous wizard, you'd also be the target of the other 2 magicians, and you'd need to take care of the most dangerous of them first. But afterward, there's a 70% chance you'd be struck down by the remaining wizard. That's trouble. Maybe it's better to take the Gaussian. It works 80% of the time, which means you wouldn't be a target until the enchantress was incapacitated. But if you succeeded in transforming her, you'd probably be turned into a fish immediately after. If you transformed the sorcerer, the enchantress would almost certainly turn you to stone. It would really be better if you missed. And that's when you have an idea. What if you took the Gaussian, then missed on purpose? Then you would wait for the sorcerer to attack the enchantress, and you'd have an 80% chance of winning against the sorcerer. It's a good idea, but there's a problem. The sorcerer could also pass his turn, and the enchantress, knowing that she couldn't pass without becoming a cat, would cast her spell on one of you. And since you're the most dangerous between you and the sorcerer, you'd be the target. And that's when you see what you really need to do. Take the weakest wand, the Banneker, and miss on purpose. Now the sorcerer knows that he'll be targeted by the enchantress, and he'll have to try to turn her into a fish to avoid being turned into stone. 70% of the time he'd succeed, and you'd have a 60% chance of winning the duel at the beginning of the next round. If he fails, chances are he'll be turned to stone, and you'd still have a 60% chance of winning the duel against the enchantress. There's a slim 3% chance you'll all be turned into cats, but when everything's accounted for, you have better than even odds of winning with this strategy, and that's the best you can do. Here's what the probability of winning for the different strategies looks like. Who would have thought that the best way to take your shot would be to throw away your shot? Hungry for more deadly duels? Try this one out. You and your opponent have to choose between 2 bowls of 5 apples each. In the green bowl, 2 of the apples are poisonous, and in the red bowl, 3 are. But if you choose the green bowl, you'll have to eat 3 of the apples at random. And if you choose the red bowl, you'll have to eat 2 at random. Here's the catch. Eat 1 poisonous apple and you'll be fine, but 2 will kill you. Which bowl should you choose? Or does it not even matter? Our sponsor, Brilliant.org, will help you develop the skills to survive any battle of wits life throws at you. They'll guide you on how to break down a problem into its component pieces, think clearly through each part, and build it back up to a conclusion. Hone your instincts at brilliant.org/TEDEd and use that link so they know we sent you. Better yet, the first 833 of you who sign up for a premium subscription will get 20% off the annual fee. And if you sign up for Brilliant using the link in the description below, Brilliant will email you the solution to their apple riddle. Your rich, eccentric uncle just passed away, and you and your 99 nasty relatives have been invited to the reading of his will. He wanted to leave all of his money to you, but he knew that if he did, your relatives would pester you forever. So he is banking on the fact that he taught you everything you need to know about riddles. Your uncle left the following note in his will. I have created a puzzle. If all 100 of you answer it together, you will share the money evenly. However, if you are the first to find the pattern and solve the problem without going through all of the legwork, you will get the entire inheritance all to yourself. Good luck. The lawyer takes you and your 99 relatives to a secret room in the mansion that contains 100 lockers, each hiding a single word. He explains, every relative is assigned a number from 1 to 100. Heir 1 will open every locker. Heir 2 will then close every second locker. Heir 3 will change the status of every third locker. Specifically, if it's open, she'll close it, but if it's closed, she'll open it. This pattern will continue until all 100 of you have gone. The words in the lockers that remain open at the end will help you crack the code for the safe. Before Cousin Thaddeus can even start down the line, you step forward and tell the lawyer you know which lockers will remain open. But how? The key is realizing that the number of times a locker is touched is the same as the number of factors in the locker number. For example, in locker number 6, person 1 will open it, person 2 will close it, person 3 will open it, and person 6 will close it. The numbers 1, 2, 3, and 6 are the factors of 6. So when a locker has an even number of factors, it'll remain closed, and when it has an odd number of factors, it'll remain open. Most of the lockers have an even number of factors, which makes sense because factors naturally pair up. In fact, the only lockers that have an odd number of factors are perfect squares, because those have one factor that when multiplied by itself equals the number. For locker 9, 1 will open it, 3 will close it, and 9 will open it. 3 times 3 equals 9, but the 3 can only be counted once. Therefore, every locker that is a perfect square will remain open. You know that these 10 lockers are the solution, so you open them immediately and read the words inside. The code is the first 5 lockers touched only twice. You realize that the only lockers touched twice have to be prime numbers, since each only has two factors, 1 and itself. So the code is 235711. The lawyer brings you to the safe, and you claim your inheritance. Too bad your relatives were always too busy being nasty to each other to pay attention to your eccentric uncle's riddles. Taking that internship in a remote mountain lab might not have been the best idea. Pulling that lever with the skull symbol just to see what it did probably wasn't so smart either. But now is not the time for regrets, because you need to get away from these mutant zombies fast. With you are the janitor, the lab assistant, and the old professor. You've gotten a head start, but there's only one way to safety. Across an old rope bridge spanning a massive gorge. You can dash across in a minute, while the lab assistant takes 2 minutes. The janitor is a bit slower and needs 5 minutes, and the professor takes a whole 10 minutes, holding onto the ropes every step of the way. By the professor's calculations, the zombies will catch up to you in just over 17 minutes. So you only have that much time to get everyone across and cut the ropes. Unfortunately, the bridge can only hold 2 people at a time. To make matters worse, it's so dark out that you can barely see, and the old lantern you grabbed on your way only illuminates a tiny area. Can you figure out a way to have everyone escape in time? Remember, no more than 2 people can cross the bridge together. Anyone crossing must either hold the lantern or stay right next to it, and any of you can safely wait in the dark on either side of the gorge. Most importantly, everyone must be safely across before the zombies arrive. Otherwise, the first zombie could step on the bridge while people are still on it. Finally, there are no tricks to use here. You can't swing across, use the bridge as a raft, or befriend the zombies. At first, it might seem like no matter what you do, you're just a minute or 2 short of time. But there is a way. The key is to minimize the time wasted by the 2 slowest people by having them cross together. And because you'll need to make a couple of return trips with the lantern, you'll want to have the fastest people available to do so. So, you and the lab assistant quickly run across with the lantern, though you have to slow down a bit to match her pace. After 2 minutes, both of you are across, and you, as the quickest, run back with the lantern. Only 3 minutes have passed. So far, so good. Now comes the hard part. The professor and the janitor take the lantern and cross together. This takes them 10 minutes, since the janitor has to slow down for the old professor, who keeps muttering that he probably shouldn't have given the zombies night vision. By the time they're across, there are only 4 minutes left, and you're still stuck on the wrong side of the bridge. But remember, the lab assistant has been waiting on the other side, and she's the second fastest of the group. So she grabs the lantern from the professor and runs back across to you. Now, with only 2 minutes left, the 2 of you make the final crossing. As you step on the far side of the gorge, you cut the ropes and collapse the bridge behind you, just in the nick of time. Maybe next summer you'll just stick to the library. Your favorite band is great at playing music, but not so great at being organized. They keep misplacing their instruments on tour, and it's driving their manager mad. On the day of the big concert, the band wakes up to find themselves tied up in a windowless, soundproof practice room. Their manager explains what's happening. Outside, there are 10 large boxes. Each contains one of your instruments. But don't be fooled by the pictures. They've been randomly placed. I'm going to let you out one at a time. While you're outside, you can look inside any 5 boxes before security takes you back to the tour bus. You can't touch the instruments or in any way communicate what you find to the others. No marking the boxes, shouting, nothing. If each one of you can find your own instrument, then you can play tonight. Otherwise, the label is dropping you. You have 3 minutes to think about it before we start. The band is in despair. After all, each musician only has a 50% chance of finding their instrument by picking 5 random boxes. And the chances that all 10 will succeed are even lower, just 1 in 1,024. But suddenly, the drummer comes up with a valid strategy that has a better than 35% chance of working. Can you figure out what it was? Here's what the drummer said. Everyone first open the box with the picture of your instrument. If your instrument is inside, you're done. Otherwise, look at whatever's in there and then open the box with that picture on it. Keep going that way until you find your instrument. The bandmates are skeptical, but amazingly enough, they all find what they need, and a few hours later, they're playing to thousands of adoring fans. So why did the drummer's strategy work? Each musician follows a linked sequence that starts with the box whose outside matches their instrument and ends with the box actually containing it. Note that if they kept going, that would lead them back to the start, so this is a loop. For example, if the boxes are arranged like so, the singer would open the first box to find the drums, go to the 8th box to find the bass, and find her microphone in the 3rd box, which would point back to the first. This works much better than random guessing, because by starting with the box with the picture of their instrument, each musician restricts their search to the loop that contains their instrument, and there are decent odds, about 35%, that all of the loops will be of length 5 or less. How do we calculate those odds? For the sake of simplicity, we'll demonstrate with a simplified case. 4 instruments, and no more than 2 guesses allowed for each musician. Let's start by finding the odds of failure, the chance that someone will need to open 3 or 4 boxes before they find their instrument. There are 6 distinct 4-box loops. One fun way to count them is to make a square. Put an instrument at each corner and draw the diagonals. See how many unique loops you can find. And keep in mind that these 2 are considered the same. They just start at different points. These 2, however, are different. We can visualize the 8 distinct 3-box loops using triangles. You'll find 4 possible triangles depending on which instrument you leave out, and 2 distinct paths on each. So of the 24 possible combinations of boxes, there are 14 that lead to failure, and 10 that result in success. That computational strategy works for any even number of musicians, but if you want a shortcut, it generalizes to a handy equation. Plug in 10 musicians, and we get odds of about 35%. What if there were 1,000 musicians? 1,000,000. As n increases, the odds approach about 30%. Not a guarantee, but with a bit of musician's luck, it's far from hopeless. Hi, everybody. If you liked this riddle, try solving these 2. You've found the hidden switches, evaded the secret traps, and now your expedition finally stands at the heart of the ancient temple inside the lost city. But as you study the inscriptions in the near total darkness, 2 of the 8 graduate students accompanying you bump into the altar. Suddenly, 2 wisps of green smoke burst forth, and the walls begin to shake. Fleeing for your lives, you come to a room you passed before with 5 hallways, including the one to the altar and the one leading back outside. The giant sand glass in the center is now flowing with less than an hour before it empties, and the rumbling tells you that you don't want to be around when that happens. From what you recall of your way here, it would take about 20 minutes to reach the exit at a fast pace. You know this is the last junction before the exit, but your trail markings have been erased, and no one remembers the way. If 9 of you split up, there should be just enough time for each group to explore one of the 4 halls ahead and report back to this room, with everyone then making a run down the correct path. There's just one problem. The inscriptions told of the altar's curse, the spirits of the city's king and queen possessing intruders and leading them to their doom through deception. Remembering the green smoke, you realize 2 of the students have been cursed. At any time, one or both of them might lie, though they also might tell the truth. You know for sure that the curse didn't get you, but you don't know which students can't be trusted, and because the possessed students may lie only occasionally, there is no guaranteed way to test them to determine which are cursed. Can you figure out a way to ensure that you all escape? Don't worry about the possessed students attacking or otherwise harming the others. This curse only affects their communication. The first thing to realize is that since you know you aren't possessed, you can explore one of the halls alone. This leaves 8 students for the remaining 3 paths. Sending groups of 4 down just 2 of the paths won't work, because if one group came back split 2 versus 2, you'd have to guess who to trust. But splitting them into 1 pair and 2 trios would work every time. And here's why. The possessed students might lie, or they might not. But you know there are only 2 of them, while the other 6 will always tell the truth. When each group returns to the hall, all of its members will either give the same report or argue about whether they found the exit. If a trio returns in total agreement, then you know none of them are lying. With the pair, you can't be sure either way, but all you need is reliable evidence about 3 of the 4 paths. The 4th you can figure out using the process of elimination. Of course, none of this matters if you're lucky enough to find the exit yourself, but otherwise, putting everything together leaves you with 3 possibilities. If each group gives a consistent answer, either everyone is telling the truth or the 2 possessed students are paired together. In either case, ignore the duo. If there's only one group arguing, both others must be telling the truth. And if there are 2 conflicts, then the possessed students are in separate groups, and you can safely trust the majority in both trios, since at least 2 people in each will be truthful. The temple collapses behind you as greenish vapors escape from 2 of the students. You're all safe and free from the curse. After that ordeal, you tell your group they all deserve a vacation, and you just happen to have another expedition coming up.
Have you ever noticed that it's harder to start pedaling your bicycle than it is to ride at a constant speed? Or wondered what causes your bicycle to move? Or thought about why it goes forward instead of backwards or sideways? Perhaps not, and you wouldn't be alone. It wasn't until the 17th century that Isaac Newton described the fundamental laws of motion, and we understood the answer to these 3 questions. What Newton recognized was that things tend to keep on doing what they are already doing. So when your bicycle is stopped, it stays stopped, and when it is going, it stays going. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and objects at rest tend to stay at rest. That's Newton's first law. Physicists call it the law of inertia, which is a fancy way of saying that moving objects don't spontaneously speed up, slow down, or change direction. It is this inertia that you must overcome to get your bicycle moving. Now you know that you have to overcome inertia to get your bicycle moving, but what is it that allows you to overcome it? Well, the answer is explained by Newton's second law. In mathematical terms, Newton's second law says that force is the product of mass times acceleration. To cause an object to accelerate, or speed up, a force must be applied. The more force you apply, the quicker you accelerate. And the more mass your bicycle has, and the more mass you have too, the more force you have to use to accelerate at the same rate. This is why it would be really difficult to pedal a 10,000-pound bicycle. And it is this force, which is applied by your legs pushing down on the pedals, that allows you to overcome Newton's law of inertia. The harder you push down on the pedals, the bigger the force, and the quicker you accelerate. Now on to the final question. When you do get your bike moving, why does it go forward? According to Newton's third law, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. To understand this, think about what happens when you drop a bouncy ball. As the bouncy ball hits the floor, it causes a downward force on the floor. This is the action. The floor reacts by pushing on the ball with the same force, but in the opposite direction, upward, causing it to bounce back up to you. Together, the floor and the ball form what's called the action-reaction pair. When it comes to your bicycle, it is a little more complicated. As your bicycle wheels spin clockwise, the parts of each tire touching the ground push backwards against the earth. The actions. It barely moves from the force caused by your bicycle tires pushing backwards, but you are propelled forward.
Energy is all around us, a physical quantity that follows precise natural laws. Our universe has a finite amount of it. It's neither created nor destroyed, but can take different forms, such as kinetic or potential energy, with different properties and formulas to remember. For instance, an LED desk lamp's 6-watt bulb transfers 6 joules of light energy per second. But let's jump back up into space to look at our planet, its systems, and their energy flow. Earth's physical systems include the atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere. Energy moves in and out of these systems, and during any energy transfer between them, some is lost to the surroundings as heat, light, sound, vibration, or movement. Our planet's energy comes from internal and external sources. Geothermal energy from radioactive isotopes and rotational energy from the spinning of the Earth are internal sources of energy, while the sun is the major external source, driving certain systems like our weather and climate. Sunlight warms the surface and atmosphere in varying amounts, and this causes convection, producing winds and influencing ocean currents. Infrared radiation, radiating out from the warmed surface of the Earth, gets trapped by greenhouse gases and further affects the energy flow. The sun is also the major source of energy for organisms. Plants, algae, and cyanobacteria use sunlight to produce organic matter from carbon dioxide and water, powering the biosphere's food chains. We release this food energy using chemical reactions, like combustion and respiration. At each level in a food chain, some energy is stored in newly made chemical structures, but most is lost to the surroundings as heat, like your body heat, released by your digestion of food. Now, as plants are eaten by primary consumers, only about 10% of their total energy is passed on to the next level. Since energy can only flow in one direction in a food chain, from producers onto consumers and decomposers, an organism that eats lower on the food chain is more efficient than one higher up. So eating producers is the most efficient level at which an animal can get its energy. But without continual input of energy to those producers, mostly from sunlight, life on Earth as we know it would cease to exist. We humans, of course, spend our energy doing a lot of things besides eating. We travel, we build, we power all sorts of technology. To do all this, We use sources like fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, which contain energy that plants captured from sunlight long ago and stored in the form of carbon. When we burn fossil fuels in power plants, we release this stored energy to generate electricity. To generate electricity, heat from burning fossil fuels is used to power turbines that rotate magnets, which in turn create magnetic field changes.
One day I found myself at the top of a mountain. One descent to go. One last chance to fulfill a lifelong dream. I wasn't even old enough to walk into a PG-13 movie alone when my dream took roots, yet there I stood. My 3 teammates by my side and facing opportunity to make history. My mind wandered just for half a second, but that half second was filled with a lifetime of memories and 2 decisions that brought me here to the top of the mountain. I made the first decision after a very challenging period in my career as an athlete. 5 years of recurring injuries as a track athlete. 5 years. It's a long time to dedicate to anything. But as much as I love track, the injuries were slowly killing my drive and my dreams. My injuries had me feeling like a failure at a sport that I was once great at. The last of the series of injuries required major elbow surgery, and as I sat on my couch, days out of surgery, I thought of an old coach and mentor's words, comparing me to a great bobsledder he once knew. Bobsled? No way. But after year upon year of not reaching the goals I set for myself in track, it was time for a change. So I reached out to the U.S. Olympic Committee and they told me to start training. Great! I was going to be a bobsledder. I didn't really know anything about it, but the first decision had been made. And there I was, in what felt like just a blink of an eye later, about to push my 4-man sled with my team to the chance of Olympic gold, Olympic glory. Back set, front set, ready, and the driver yelled and off we went. We dug as deep as we could, and as the cadence of our steps increased and the sled accelerated, we left everything we had on the track before leaving the ice and boarding our night train sled. And a calm came over me. And once in the sled, as it was picking up speed, for just another millisecond, my mind went back to that day on the couch. How can I train for the bobsled team without getting hurt over and over again like before? I had to look into the mirror and realize that I still wanted to compete. I still wanted to succeed. But I had to face the reality that my getting hurt wasn't to be blamed elsewhere. I had to realize that if I had a problem, it was up to me to change it. I had to confront that what I had been doing all this time may not have been the best things for me. I had to confront my reality and make a change, and that was the second decision. The decision in my mind not to get hurt anymore would have many layers, but it mostly had to do with taking responsibility for all the variables in my life. If I had thought something I would do or something I felt would lead me to injury, then it most certainly would. I would have to have a fundamental shift in mindset. I learned to let go of the fears I had trained myself to have over the years and simply decided to trust myself and my body to push through situations I had thought insurmountable before. What followed those 5 years of injuries were 9 years of not missing one race I entered for the USA national and Olympic teams. Because I made a decision, then another one, and held true to those 2 decisions, I found myself back with my team approaching 90 miles per hour. And as we came around the last corners, I could hear the crowd cheering and the cowbells blaring, and a hard "You!"
coming from the masses as we passed by at 95 miles an hour. But someone wasn't yelling "you" at us, they were yelling "USA." But we were moving so fast we only heard the first piece of it. We then came around the last bend, and when we all looked up, the clock simply read 1. We had done it. We were Olympic gold medalists. We were the best in the world. My hands went up immediately as the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life had finally come true. And as our sled slowly came to a stop and I looked into the crowd to see my mom and dad and sister and family and friends crying for me, I knew my decisions had been worth the sacrifice, worth the fear. 2 decisions in those 5 minutes sitting on that couch began to change my life, and sticking to them fulfilled my dreams. It was those decisions and standing by them that ultimately gave me the confidence to perform at the Olympic Games. What 2 decisions can you make and stick to that will change your life forever? I challenge you to look at what you're doing in your life and think of what you dream to do.
Today, we're talking about weird materials that we use in space, in robots, and in your mouth. I'm talking about shape memory alloys. Like the name says, these are metals that remember different shapes. To understand how these metals work, we've got to talk about atoms and organizing. Let's talk about atoms first. Atoms are tiny bits of matter that you cannot see with your eye, yet they make up everything in our world, from the chair that you're sitting on to your cell phone. Atoms have some surprising ways of behaving too. We'll talk about that shortly. Now, how big is an atom? Well, imagine pulling one of your hairs out of your head and whittling it like a stick 100,000 times. One of those shavings would be the width of an atom. They're that small. Now let's talk about atoms and organizing. You may not know this, but atoms arrange themselves similar to the way we humans arrange ourselves. Sometimes they sit in rows, like we do on a bus or an airplane. We call that seating arrangement a phase. Other times they sit diagonal from each other, sort of like seats in a movie theater or sports stadium. This is another phase. When atoms move from one seating to another, this is called a phase change. Phase changes are all around us. You may already know about water's phases, solid, liquid, and gas. Many other materials have phases like that too. Some of them have several solid phases. Okay, back to those shape memory alloys we mentioned before. When we say that the metals remember their different shapes, what we're really saying is they remember different seating arrangements of atoms. When the atoms rearrange, the metal moves from one shape to another. Let's look at a phase change in action. Here I have a metal wire that is made out of nickel and titanium. This metal wire is a shape memory alloy, and I'm going to make it switch between its different shapes using heat from a lighter. Watch this. I'm going to wrap this wire around my finger and then heat it. Amazing! That wire returns to a straight line when I heat it. Let's try that again. I'm going to wrap it around my finger and heat it. Yup, that's still amazing. Not only is it amazing, this is weird because metals generally don't do that. Here's a paper clip. When I heat it, I get nothing. What we're seeing is the shape memory wire changing phases when it gets hot. When the wire is cold, atoms are in a diagonal arrangement like the movie theater seating we talked about before. We call this a monoclinic arrangement, and scientists will call this phase martensite. When I heated up the wire, the atoms moved into columns like airplane seating. This is a cubic arrangement. Scientists will call this phase austenite. So when we added the heat, the atoms shifted positions seamlessly, and they'll do this forever. They have this coordinated motion, just like members of a tireless marching band. Each makes a small shift, but altogether, those small shifts create a totally different pattern. So that's pretty cool, but where do we use these materials? Well, if you look in the sky tonight, shape memory alloys are at work on Mars. They're used to move panels on the Mars rover so that it can study the environment. Like our metal straightened when it was heated, the metals holding the panels will move when electrically heated, When we stop heating the shape memory metal, the panel will return back due to an opposing spring. Back on Earth, shape memory alloys are used to open up clogged arteries as stents, which are small collapsible springs that force open passages. Shape memory alloys are also used to move robots, toy butterflies, teeth and braces, and for a perfect fit every time, shape memory wires are used as underwires in bras. Now you know Victoria's Secret. By popping a bra into the dryer, it'll be brand new every time. So whether it's on Mars or in your mouth, small atomic movements can create huge changes. And understanding the way atoms behave allows us to make materials that make our world a better place.
Have you ever wondered how things are built within our bodies? Why our bodies can regrow and repair themselves, and how we can pass on genes from one generation to the next? Yet none of our man-made objects have these traits. They're simply thrown away when they break, and they definitely can't reproduce. The answer lies in something called self-assembly. Self-assembly is a system where unordered parts come together in an organized structure, completely on their own. This means that a pile of parts on your desk should, in theory, be able to move around on their own, find one another, and build something useful. This seems impossible, like Transformers or the Sandman, but it's exactly how our bodies are built, how our immune system works, and why we can reproduce. Self-assembly is the factory and copy machines within our bodies that make proteins fold and DNA replicate. It's a process that not only happens in the biological and chemical world, but is a phenomenon that can be seen from magnets to snowflakes, robotics, social networks, the formations of cities and galaxies, to name just a few. In biology and chemistry, self-assembly is everywhere, from atomic interactions, cellular replication, to DNA, RNA, and protein folding. Proteins are like bicycle chains with sequences of amino acid links. They self-assemble into 3D structures because of the interaction between the amino acids along the chain, as well as the relationship between the chain and the environment. These forces make the flexible chain fold into a 3D shape that governs the function of the protein. Viruses, on the other hand, are like soccer balls. They're made up of a series of subunits with specific shapes. Those shapes have attraction to one another, so they fit together in precise ways. Imagine you want to build a perfect sphere. It turns out that making a precise sphere through traditional means is actually quite difficult. Alternatively, you could try to self-assemble the sphere. One way would be to inflate the sphere like a bubble or a balloon. Another option would be to create many identical pieces that would come together to make a perfect sphere. You could try to put the pieces together one by one, but it might take a long time and you'd still have human errors. Instead, you could design a connection between the components like magnets and dump them into a container. When you shook the container, all the parts would find one another and build the sphere for you. Self-assembly is being used as a new design, science, and engineering tool for making the next generation of technologies easier to build, more adaptive, and less reliant on fossil fuels. Scientists are now making molecular microchips for computers where small molecular elements are given the right conditions to form themselves into organized pathways. Similarly, we can now use self-assembly as a way to make 3D structures with DNA, like capsules that could deliver drugs inside the body, releasing them only if certain conditions are met. Soon, self-assembly will be used for larger applications, where materials can repair themselves, water pipes can reconfigure on demand, buildings can adapt on their own to environment or dynamic loading, and space structures can self-assemble without humans. Imagine if our factories were more like organisms or brains, and our construction sites were like gardens that grow and adapt independently. The possibilities are endless, and it's now up to us to design a better world through self-assembly.
We live in a three-dimensional world where everything has length, width, and height. But what if our world were two-dimensional? We would be squashed down to occupy a single plane of existence, geometrically speaking, of course. And what would that world look and feel like? This is the premise of Edwin Abbott's 1884 novella, Flatland. Flatland is a fun mathematical thought experiment that follows the trials and tribulations of a square exposed to the third dimension. But what is a dimension anyway? For our purposes, a dimension is a direction, which we can picture as a line. For our direction to be a dimension, it has to be at right angles to all other dimensions. So a one-dimensional space is just a line. A two-dimensional space is defined by two perpendicular lines, which describe a flat plane, like a piece of paper. And a three-dimensional space adds a third perpendicular line, which gives us height and the world we're familiar with. So what about 4 dimensions, and 5, and 11? Where do we put these new perpendicular lines? This is where Flatland can help us. Let's look at our square protagonist's world. Flatland is populated by geometric shapes ranging from isosceles triangles to equilateral triangles to squares, pentagons, hexagons, all the way up to circles. These shapes are all scurrying around a flat world, living their flat lives. They have a single eye on the front of their faces, and let's see what the world looks like from their perspective. What they see is essentially one dimension, a line. But in Abbott's Flatland, closer objects are brighter, and that's how they see depth. So a triangle looks different from a square, looks different from a circle, and so on. Their brains cannot comprehend the third dimension. In fact, they vehemently deny its existence because it's simply not part of their world or experience. But all they need, as it turns out, is a little boost. One day, a sphere shows up in Flatland to visit our square hero. Here's what it looks like when the sphere passes through Flatland from the square's perspective. And this blows his little square mind. Then, the sphere lifts the square into the third dimension, the height direction where no Flatlander has gone before, and shows him his world. From up here, the square can see everything. The shapes of buildings, all the precious gems hidden in the earth, and even the insides of his friends, which is probably pretty awkward. Once the hapless square comes to terms with the third dimension, he begs his host to help him visit the fourth and higher dimensions. But the sphere bristles at the mere suggestion of dimensions higher than 3 and exiles the square back to Flatland. Now, the sphere's indignation is understandable. The fourth dimension is very difficult to reconcile with our experience of the world. Short of being lifted into the fourth dimension by a visiting hypercube, we can't experience it. But we can get close. You'll recall that when the sphere first visited the second dimension, he looked like a series of circles that started as a point when he touched Flatland, grew bigger until he was halfway through, and then shrank smaller again. We can think of this visit as a series of 2D cross-sections of a 3D object. Well, we can do the same thing in the third dimension with a 4-dimensional object. Let's say that a hypersphere is the 4D equivalent of a 3D sphere. When the 4D object passes through the third dimension, it'll look something like this. Let's look at one more way of representing a 4-dimensional object. Let's say we have a point, a 0-dimensional shape. Now we extend it out 1 inch, and we have a 1-dimensional line segment. Extend the whole line segment by 1 inch, and we get a 2D square. Take the whole square and extend it out 1 inch, and we get a 3D cube. You can see where we're going with this. Take the whole cube and extend it out 1 inch, this time perpendicular to all 3 existing directions, and we get a 4D hypercube, also called a tesseract. For all we know, there could be 4-dimensional life forms somewhere out there, occasionally poking their heads into our bustling 3D world and wondering what all the fuss is about. In fact, there could be whole other 4-dimensional worlds beyond our detection, hidden from us forever by the nature of our perception. Doesn't that blow your little spherical mind?
We like to think of romantic feelings as spontaneous and indescribable things that come from the heart. But it's actually your brain running a complex series of calculations within a matter of seconds that's responsible for determining attraction. Doesn't sound quite as poetic, does it? But just because the calculations are happening in your brain doesn't mean those warm, fuzzy feelings are all in your head. In fact, all 5 of your senses play a role, each able to vote for or veto a budding attraction. The eyes are the first components in attraction. Many visual beauty standards vary between cultures and eras, and signs of youth, fertility, and good health, such as long, lustrous hair or smooth, scar-free skin, are almost always in demand because they're associated with reproductive fitness. And when the eyes spot something they like, our instinct is to move closer so the other senses can investigate. The nose's contribution to romance is more than noticing perfume or cologne. It's able to pick up on natural chemical signals known as pheromones. These not only convey important physical or genetic information about their source, but are able to activate a physiological or behavioral response in the recipient. In one study, a group of women at different points in their ovulation cycles wore the same t-shirts for 3 nights. After male volunteers were randomly assigned to smell either one of the worn shirts or a new unworn one, saliva samples showed an increase in testosterone in those who had smelled a shirt worn by an ovulating woman. Such a testosterone boost may give a man the nudge to pursue a woman he might not have otherwise noticed. A woman's nose is particularly attuned to MHC molecules, which are used to fight disease. In this case, opposites attract. When a study asked women to smell t-shirts that had been worn by different men, they preferred the odors of those whose MHC molecules differed from theirs. This makes sense. Genes that result in a greater variety of immunities may give offspring a major survival advantage. Our ears also determine attraction. Men prefer females with high-pitched, breathy voices and wide formant spacing, correlated with smaller body size, while women prefer low-pitched voices with a narrow formant spacing that suggest a larger body size. And not surprisingly, touch turns out to be crucial for romance. In this experiment, not realizing the study had begun, participants were asked to briefly hold the coffee, either hot or iced. Later, the participants read a story about a hypothetical person and were asked to rate their personality. Those who had held the hot cup of coffee perceived the person in the story as happier, more social, more generous, and better-natured than those who had held the cup of iced coffee, who rated the person as cold, stoic, and unaffectionate. If a potential mate has managed to pass all these tests, there is still one more, the infamous first kiss, a rich and complex exchange of tactile and chemical cues, such as the smell of one's breath and the taste of their mouth. This magical moment is so critical that a majority of men and women have reported losing their attraction to someone after a bad first kiss. Once attraction is confirmed, your bloodstream is flooded with norepinephrine, activating your fight or flight system. Your heart beats faster, your pupils dilate, and your body releases glucose for additional energy, not because you're in danger, but because your body is telling you that something important is happening. To help you focus, norepinephrine creates a sort of tunnel vision, blocking out surrounding distractions, possibly even warping your sense of time and enhancing your memory. This might explain why people never forget their first kiss. The idea of so much of our attraction being influenced by chemicals and evolutionary biology may seem cold and scientific rather than romantic. But the next time you see someone you like, try to appreciate how your entire body is playing matchmaker to decide if that beautiful stranger is right for you. How do you know what's happening in your world? The amount of information just a click away may be limitless, but the time and energy we have to absorb and evaluate it is not. All the information in the world won't be very useful unless you know how to read the news. To your grandparents, parents, or even older siblings, this idea would have sounded strange. Only a few decades ago, news was broad-based. Your choices were limited to a couple of general interest magazines and newspapers of record, and 3 or 4 TV networks, where trusted newscasters delivered the day's news at the same reliable time every evening. But the problems with this system soon became apparent as mass media spread. While it was known that authoritarian countries controlled and censored information, a series of scandals showed that democratic governments were also misleading the public, often with media cooperation. Revelations of covert wars, secret assassinations, and political corruption undermined public faith in official narratives presented by mainstream sources. This breakdown of trust in media gatekeepers led to alternative newspapers, radio shows, and cable news competing with the major outlets and covering events from various perspectives. More recently, the internet has multiplied the amount of information and viewpoints, with social media, blogs, and online video turning every citizen into a potential reporter. But if everyone is a reporter, nobody is, and different sources may disagree not only on opinions, but on the facts themselves. So how do you get the truth, or something close? One of the best ways is to get the original news unfiltered by middlemen. Instead of articles interpreting a scientific study or a politician's speech, you can often find the actual material and judge for yourself. For current events, follow reporters on social media. During major events such as the Arab Spring or the Ukrainian protests, newscasters and bloggers have posted updates and recordings from the midst of the chaos. Though many of these later appear in articles or broadcasts, keep in mind that these polished versions often combine the voice of the person who was there with the input of editors who weren't. At the same time, the more chaotic the story, the less you should try to follow it in real time. In events like terrorist attacks and natural disasters, today's media attempts continuous coverage even when no reliable new information is available, sometimes leading to incorrect information or false accusations of innocent people. It's easy to be anxious in such events, but try checking for the latest information at several points in the day rather than every few minutes, allowing time for complete details to emerge and false reports to be refuted. While good journalism aims for objectivity, media bias is often unavoidable. When you can't get the direct story, read coverage in multiple outlets, which employ different reporters and interview different experts. Tuning into various sources and noting the differences lets you put the pieces together for a more complete picture. It's also crucial to separate fact from opinion. Words like think, likely, or probably mean that the outlet is being careful, or worse, taking a guess. And watch out for reports that rely on anonymous sources. These could be people who have little connection to the story, or have an interest in influencing coverage, their anonymity making them unaccountable for the information they provide. Finally, and most importantly, try to verify news before spreading it. While social media has enabled the truth to reach us faster, it's also allowed rumors to spread before they can be verified, and falsehoods to survive long after they've been refuted. So before you share that unbelievable or outrageous news item, do a web search to find any additional information or context you might have missed, and what others are saying about it. Today, we are more free than ever from the old media gatekeepers who used to control the flow of information. But with freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to curate our own experience and ensure that this flow does not become a flood, leaving us less informed than before we took the plunge.